Welcome back, people. This is part 4 in our look at the collapse of the whiskey market in 2023. It's not a collapse, it's a correction. The whole market's not collapsed, it's just certain parts of the market that have collapsed, but that's got a lot of people panicking. So we're taking quite an in-depth look at the market in 2023. So we've got 3 videos prior to this one. We've got one where we look at value and growth investors and in terms of what motivates investors to go and buy. We've got the wider economic situation that's happening in the moment that is impacting people's decisions on whether to buy or sell and how they buy and sell. And then we looked at a video about game theory and sort of the things that impact people's decisions and the psychology behind some of those decisions. So the one thing that unites all of those is that these are factors that are based by players, people looking to buy and sell. So we've been, like, if you want to say that these videos are partitioning blame or giving reason for the correction in the market, these have all been looking at the people playing in the market, the buyers and the sellers. This video is a slight change. We're kind of looking at the industry because I don't think the industry is itself entirely free from blame here. And by the industry, we're going to talk pretty much about online auction houses here and bricks and mortar auction houses to a smaller extent. But many of the problems that we've seen many of the corrections have probably been driven by the buyers and the sellers. But the auction houses can't just sort of walk away from this scot-free, because I think that, yes, there are lots of excellent auctioneers in this country selling whiskey, but there's also a lot of bad practice happening at the moment. And again, to qualify this, I was an auctioneer for over 10 years, wielding a gavel, selling thousands of lots, millions of pounds worth of items under a gavel every year for a big bricks and mortar auction house. I know auctions people, I know what auctioneers do, and I know quite in depth about sort of like the laws and things about sort of how auctions should practice. Now, I'm not saying that none of this is aimed at any one particular auction house, but broadly speaking, you'll notice trends. And I want you to get into the comments below as well. If you've got anything that really, really, really annoy you about some of the auction houses and what they're doing at the moment, please don't mention names of who they are. Just tell me what the problem is or the thing that they're committing wrong in there. So my first big peeve at the moment, and one of the things that really is destroying the market, are irresponsible reserves. Auctioneers, you know what it's like. You find a bottle, you bid on it, and it's reserve not met, reserve not met, reserve not met, reserve not met. And you're thinking, now, hang on a minute, the last one made 4-5, and I'm bidding $5,000 here. Why am I still bidding against a reserve? And quite often, I'm finding that a lot of reserves are being based on prices, or I'm assuming that reserves are being based on prices that were set 6-12 months ago when the market was in a completely different shape. And it's kind of like this complete ignorance that the market has not just done this, but it's done this. So the reserves are still set here. The auction houses are still telling people that their reserves are right at the top of the market. And of course, we'll get you the top of the market prices. Now, some auction houses use this as a tactic to get bottles in. Perhaps they're a smaller auction house and they don't have the weight and the power to sort of get the bottles in through their marketing and stuff. So they say, okay, right, here's a bottle of Macallan Private Eye. We'll set a $6,000 reserve on it. And then they know it's not going to sell at that, but the customer thinks, blimey, yeah, I'm going to get $6,000 for this. And then it doesn't sell. And then it goes into the next sale because the bottle's somewhere in the north of Scotland or wherever. And then it doesn't sell again, and it doesn't sell again. And eventually you come down to sort of like a realistic reserve, say $3,500-4,000 as the market price is at the moment, and it would sell. But of course that customer can't go all the way from their home to go and collect that bottle and bring it all the way back. They just basically, because the auctioneers have basically got it. Of course they'll ship it back free of charge, but the customer did want to sell it in the first place, and it's not their fault that the market's changed. Go and watch Mark's video, look how much the markets have changed. So this causes problems though as well. There is a responsibility of the auctioneer to set a fair reserve, an absolutely fair reserve. It shouldn't be a price well over and above that can be expected, because it just causes this situation. And the biggest problem of these irresponsible reserves is that people just get bored of bidding. Reserve not met, reserve not met, reserve not met. Sod that, I'm not bidding anymore on this bottle. And the bottle stops at about $3,000 and it should be making $4-5,000. But people are just fed up against bidding against these sort of like super high reserves. Now, the next one is sort of similar, somewhat related to this problem of reserves at auction houses. And it's the fact that these reserves on online auctions are, broadly speaking, completely unknown. If you go to a bricks and mortar auction house, let's say you go to Christie's, Sotheby's, Bonhams, or you go to any auction house in your local town or city, whenever they have an auction, like an art auction, a silver auction, a jewelry auction, whatever, they will give you an estimate. So they will say, right, this silver letter knife has an estimate of 20 to 30 pounds on it. There is an understanding that legally the reserve cannot be any higher than the low estimate because it's false advertising. If you advertise something with an estimate of 20 to 30 pounds and the reserve's higher than that, then it's misleading because the reserve is higher and therefore it cannot be purchased from that. So any bricks and mortar auction house, if you go to Christie's and you see an estimate of £5,000 to £10,000, the reserve can be no higher than the low estimate. So if you saw a bottle in an online auction that had an estimate, let's say use a private eye again for an example, that was worth, £4 or £5,000, and you saw an estimate of £8,000 to £10,000, you would not even bid on it. You would not even bid on it because you know that reserve is probably going to be disproportionately out and the auctioneer's got their valuation massively out of alignment. But a lot of these auction houses online offer no reserves. They offer no disclosure of the reserves. And there's no legal requirement for them, I don't believe, to disclose the reserve. But at the same time, that leaves bidders completely in the dark as to sort of what they're bidding against. Are they bidding against a realistic reserve, or are they bidding against one that's triple the estimate, triple the world record price for that bottle? And again, I'm not saying that these are things that need solving, but these are things that are compounding in a difficult market to make matters even worse. And again, like if you've got these unknown reserves, people just get fed up and stop bidding. And again, that lowers the impetus and that lowers the drive. Another thing that you've got to look at about reserves as well is like the psychology of reserves. And this is a really interesting one because if you see, and this is, there's lots written about this in sort of like social theory and whatnot, but it's kind of like reserves are good and bad. They're good because they protect the vendor from a poor auction result, but they, not always, but can quite often contribute to lower selling prices. Why? And it's more so in online auctions than in person auctions when you've not got an auctioneer to sort of like keep the momentum going and sort of get keep command of the room. But in an online auction, it's, if you're constantly bidding and it says reserve not met, reserve not met, reserve not met, reserve not met, there's never any ownership of that bottle. There's nothing really there driving you to go, oh, that's mine now. And then someone outbids you and then you go, oh, I'll have another one. And then you've got it. And then in the last minute it changes and you've lost it. And it's like, oh, £200 more than I wanted to pay, but I want it. I've been bidding on it. I've owned it. I'll bid again. But with the reserves and the volume of these reserves at the moment at auction, I mean, if you look at any of the top auction houses or pretty much any auction house at the moment, you'll see that the results, quite often, a large portion of the first page, the best bottles didn't meet their reserve because of but anyway, the point is that I'm trying to make is that when you've got a reserve on an item, there's no way for the bidder to get psychologically attached to it unless that reserve is set at a realistic price. And as a result, again, people are just like, sod that, I'm just not going to bid on that. Again, another point, it's coming back to reserves again. And this is, the auction houses must know there's a problem with their reserves because in the last couple of months, I've noticed a change in some of their auction houses' practices in terms of how they show the results and see whether a reserve has been met or not. So on some of what I would describe as the more transparent auction houses, when you're on the lot listing page and you see all the results where you're bidding live in the auction, some of them will say reserve not met. So you kind of go, meh, scroll past it. So a lot of people have gone, meh, and scroll past it. So there are some auction houses now that aren't putting the reserve status on that main meta listing page where all your bottles are neatly in a grid. They only put that into the product listing where you have to click into it and see. And why would they have done that if there wasn't a problem? And this is only, as far as I've seen, happening in the last sort of 2 or 3 months. And it's happened with quite a few of the main auction houses. And again, it's whether it's getting quite hard now to understand whether the reserves have been met or not in the auction results post-sale, because sometimes, again, they're hidden and it doesn't necessarily say whether reserve was met or the reserve wasn't met. So, look, I'm bored you to life now about reserves, but there are a lot of problems with the reserves, and I think the reserves are trying to hark back to days when the market was a lot stronger, and it isn't, so that is disrupting prices. But this next one is probably a much bigger impact on the market. It's too many auction houses. There's way too many auction houses in the UK now. Like this morning, I had a quick tally up. There's over 20 online auction houses in the UK. 20, all having monthly sales. 20 divided by 4. You have got, well, that was crap maths, wasn't it? You've got 5 auctions a week. 5 auctions a week to be on top of, to search through, check your bottles are there. Are you going to bid on them? Are you going to remember to bid on them? Crap, this one finishes on Sunday night. This one finishes on Monday night. This one's only on for 3 days. This one's on for 10 days. This one's on for 7 days. It's a full-time job to bid at these auction houses. And the other difficult thing about all these auction houses is that there isn't like a meta search base. There's nowhere that you can kind of type into one place, I am looking for this, and then it will find you all the results. No, you have to go through every single bloody auction house to find them. You have to register, you've got to do your registration fee, and then only when you get there and you start bidding, reserve not met, reserve not met, reserve not met. But seriously, people have seen that there's a lot of money to make selling whiskey through auction. There's millions of pounds, probably tens of millions of pounds of whiskey sold each year through these online auction houses. So you can see why other companies would want to come in. But the problem is we're in a really crowded marketplace now, and it's not easy to track. You know, if you're one of the OG, if you remember going back, say, just sort of 5 years ago, you only had to cover 3 or 4 auctions and you would be covering pretty much every bottle that was being sold in the UK. So of course, when you're looking at results pages like on services like Whisky Hunter, and you're looking at the trend of prices, you know, the spread of prices for a single bottle might be anywhere from sort of like £800 up to £1,500, because the £800 one wasn't found by everyone and the £1,500 was in probably a more prolific auction. So broadly speaking, that bigger spread changes the average price and changes the perception, that changes the motivations of people that we talked about in those first 3 videos. And this is even, so this last point that I'm going to make is a little bit more detached than the others, but it's relevant, and it's to do with multiple bottles being in the same auction or multiple bottles being available at the same time. Now, in a traditional auction house, and by a traditional auction house, I mean your Christie's, Sotheby's, Bonhams, your big main bricks and mortar auction houses, even the ones in your local towns and cities, like Tennant's, William Wallace, Cheffins, those sorts of places. Let's say that they've got an art sale and they're selling art, and you get 2 prints, 2 identical prints. It's very unlikely that that auction house will choose to put them both in one auction. They'll probably split them across 2 auctions. The problem there is if you put them both into the one auction, you've got 2 bidders bidding on the first one, you get a fantastic price. And then obviously one of them bought it, one of them didn't. So the second one comes under the hammer, and then the second one makes less money because you've not got the underbidder there. So as a broad rule, you will find that identicals are not often sold in big traditional auction houses. But on the online auction houses, and this isn't their fault, it's due to the volume of bottles, but it's a contributing factor here, is that there are so many bottles. You might have, let's say, 3 Macallan Private Eyes, 4 Macallan Private Eyes in one auction alone, and that's in one of your 20 auctions that are happening in the UK, let alone the ones that are happening around the rest of the world, in one auction. So what's going to happen? How many buyers are there at the moment? We know that there are fewer buyers in the market at the moment from our previous videos, and there's more sellers. So you're going to get these bottles, and the problem is that you've got 4 bottles. So again, like the bidding is diluted across more of the same things. Now, under a traditional bricks and mortar auction house, you would see those bottles spread over a course of a number of different sales potentially. But with the online auctions, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault. It's a symptom. You know, they can't turn away these bottles because they'll lose it and they'll go to somebody else. And it's no sort of real problem because there's 20 of other ones for them to sort of go and sell them at. But it does have a diluting effect, because in one auction, you're not going to get, say, 4 bottles of Private Eye all achieving the same price, because you just won't. The bidding is diluted. You know, unless you've got serious trade buyers and they're sort of kind of on the back foot at the moment because of how the market is. It's interesting. It's interesting. So there you go. There's me waffling on about auctions and some of the problems that I feel are contributing to the market correction that we're experiencing at the moment. What about you? What do you think? Are there any practices that I've missed here? Get in the comments below. Please don't put any auction house names in there. We don't want to go disrespecting anybody. These can just be generic comments. So what do you think? Get in the comments below and let me know, and maybe we'll address some of these in a follow-up video.